Okay, so in this final part, part 4 of the Integumentary System 2 lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the functions of the skin. So now we know the structures that we find in the skin. What role do they play in the overall functions of the skin? So this learning objective is that you should be able to use specific examples to describe the primary functions of the integumentary system. So the primary functions of the integumentary system, of course, because it's our outer barrier from the external environment, of course it protects us from the external environment. It's responsible for us getting information about their environment, so we have cutaneous sensation. It's involved in regulating our body temperature, so body temperature homeostasis or thermoregulation. The skin can act as a blood reservoir, or the integumentary system can act as a blood reservoir. There's a small amount of excretion and absorption that takes place. And lastly, it's involved in vitamin D synthesis. So these are the 6 primary functions of the integumentary system. We're going to take a look at each of these in more detail about which specific components of the integumentary system play which role in each of these primary functions. And of course, you just know from your own experience that looking at the skin of someone can give you information about the health and well-being of the person. So if they're coming out with lots of pimples, their skin looks oily, or if the skin looks dry, it gives you a lot of information about what's going on with that person. Maybe they look pale, maybe they look flushed, red and flushed. So it gives you a lot of information about the health and well-being of that person. So let's take a look at each of these functions in more detail and see which structures play which role. So protection from the external environment, and this is a big long list, okay? So I just warn you now that there's a lot of things which play a role in protection from the external environment in the skin. So the fact that we have a stratified epithelium, stratified squamous keratinized epithelium, means that it's a very good barrier from the external environment. So the many layers can help to protect us. The fact that it's keratinized helps to protect us from invading microorganisms, from abrasion, as we know, from heat and from chemicals. So without that keratinization, then you're much more liable to damage via these various insults. The cell junctions, so the many desmosomes and hemidesmosomes hold all of these cells together, so that helps to resist microbial invasion and prevents their separation through abrasion. We know that the layer within the stratum granulosum has the lamellar bodies, and at cell death they release the lamellar bodies, and that coats those outer surface cells with a water proof substance, and that helps to prevent water evaporation, so it prevents the skin from drying out, us losing excess water. Sebum from the sebaceous glands, we know that it's a conditioner or a moistener of the skin surface, and that helps to prevent the skin from drying out, therefore prevents it from cracking, exposing the underlying blood vessels and connective tissues, preventing infections from taking place. Sweat actually has a slightly acidic pH, and that actually means that it prevents some microbes from growing. So we always have a native microbial flora on our surfaces, our body surfaces. And most of the time they're good bacteria, they're beneficial to us. And the acidic pH of sweat helps to help regulate those microbes so that the bad microbes don't grow more than the good microbes do. Melanin, produced by the melanocytes, passed on to the keratinocytes, help to protect the stem cells of the stratum basale from ultraviolet radiation. Langerhans cells, remember they're the dendritic cells which are best visualized in the stratum spinosum. They are phagocytic cells, so they can phagocytose any invading microorganisms. They can leave the skin, go to a lymph node, present that antigen to a lymphocyte-initiated immune response. We can have transient and resident white blood cells within the papillary dermis. Most of the time there's not a lot of cells in the papillary dermis because the stratified nature of the epidermis means that it's a good barrier to microorganisms, but in some cases when there is some sort of response, you can get infiltration of white blood cells in this area, initiating an immune response. The dermal papillae and epidermal pegs, remember they interdigitate like fingers locking in and holding together. So the increased surface area of contact between the dermal papillae and the epidermal pegs increases the surface area for contact, prevents separation, protects from abrasion and things like that. Hairs and glands are a source of new skin. So because they're downgrowths of the epidermis, they of course carry with them the basal cells, the cells which undergo mitosis to produce new cells. And so depending on the level of damage to the skin, if it's only the outer surface layers, then you may have some, if the stratum basale is left behind, then that's fine, it regrows over time. If you damage some of the outer layers of the dermis, as long as you've still got hair and glands present, you've still got basal cells, stem cells, which can create new keratinocytes and form new skin. It's only once you actually completely remove the outer layer of skin and even the subcutis or the subcutaneous layer that you no longer have hair, no longer have glands, you no longer then have stem cells which can repair the skin. In that case, you need to, of course, have skin grafts and things like that. So that's it for protection. You can see there's so much within the integumentary system which can play a role in protection. Sensory perception, so we know that our skin gives us information like touch, pressure, vibration, temperature and pain. Remembering that there are the four components of our sensory receptors which exist within the skin, free nerve endings within the epidermis and dermis, and also associated with the hairs as peritracheal nerve endings. They're associated with temperature and pain, of course. Merkel cells found within the stratum basale of the epidermis. They're responsible for the detection of light touch, as are the Meissner's corpuscles. These are those specialized receptors. They have connective tissue capsules and they're found in the dermal papillae, and they also recognize light touch. And then deep within the reticular dermis and within the subcutis, we can find Pacinian corpuscles. They're the onion-shaped ones deep within that region, and they can detect pressure and vibration. So the skin plays an important role in body temperature regulation or homeostasis or thermoregulation. The first way that the body can do that is through sweating. So the eccrine sweat glands, remember, are the only type of sweat glands that are responsible for thermoregulation. The apocrine are only emotional sweating. So they can release water onto the surface of the skin that can evaporate. As it evaporates, it takes away heat from the surface of the skin, thereby reducing that surface temperature. Hair and goosebumps. So we know our erector pili muscles are attached to hair follicles. When they contract, what it does is it makes the hair stand up on end. Now, because we're not particularly hairy, some of us anyway, then when the hair stands up on end, you sometimes get these little raised ridges on your skin, which we recognize as goosebumps. So if you can't always see the hairs, but you see a goosebump, that's where a hair exists. Okay, so the erector pili muscle is contracting. It's pulling the hair up. The idea is that the hair then traps a layer of warm air near the surface and keeps that outer layer warm. So you often get goosebumps when you're cold. We also know that you get goosebumps when you get scared. So it's innervated by the autonomic nervous system as well. And our skin can alter its blood supply. So this diagram here is just showing the blood supply of the skin. So we've got our big blood vessels in the subcutaneous region, then they're branching here, and you can see that there's lots of different branches. They sometimes have these little shunts, which means that they can direct the blood either to the surface or direct it away from the surface, depending upon what sort of body temperature is required. So if you're really, really hot and you need to get rid of excess heat, of course what you can do is then shunt the blood to the skin surface and you can lose heat from the skin surface. Or alternatively, what you can do is, if you're cold, you can constrict this region, prevent the blood going to the skin capillaries and keep it deep within the body so that you're not losing heat through radiation. And of course that's reflected in colour of the skin. So when you're hot, you've just been to the gym or you've just run down to the shops, literally, then your face is often flushed red because your body's now trying to lose heat through the skin surface of your face. But alternatively, if you're really, really cold, your skin can go very white or pale blue, particularly for those of us who don't have a lot of pigmentation in our skin, of course. So at any one point in time, a lot of your blood actually exists within your skin. And so in times of crisis, so in a flight or fight mode, someone comes at you with a banana, then you can actually run. And so what happens is that blood can be diverted from your skin and then move it to areas that require a greater blood supply, so you can actually run away from being stabbed with a banana. So your skeletal muscles, the muscles of your legs and arms, your heart to increase blood supply to the muscles, and your brain, of course, thinking ways to get away from a banana. This may also lead to increased body temperature, of course, because if you're not bringing blood to the skin surface, you're keeping it inside your body, so the body temperature can rise. Now, this is only a minor role of the skin, excretion and absorption. So we lose about 400 mils of water lost per day by evaporation, and 200 mils of this is lost by sweat. In sweat, we often have small amounts of salt, sodium chloride, some carbon dioxide, and some nitrogenous wastes, so ammonia and urea. These can be excreted by sweat. There's very little absorption that takes place from the skin via water-soluble means because of the barrier of our epidermis. But lipid-soluble substances can be absorbed through the skin. So things like lipid-soluble vitamins and some drugs can be absorbed. So you've probably heard of patches, various patches which you can have, like nicotine patches, nitroglycerin, and there are also some coming onto the market, some patches associated with hormonal control of reproduction. Unfortunately, some toxins can also be absorbed through the skin, so things like acetone and carbon tetrachloride can be absorbed through the skin as well. Lastly, the skin's involved in vitamin D synthesis. So ultraviolet radiation activates precursors in the skin that then are modified within the liver to form calcitrol, which is the most active form of vitamin D. Calcitrol is necessary for the uptake of calcium from the alimentary tract. So without calcitrol, you don't get calcium from your digestive system, and so your body begins to absorb calcium from your bones, and that means your bones become a little bit bendy, and so insufficient calcium can cause rickets. So this person here unfortunately has rickets, so the bones are actually quite bendy, and of course insufficient calcium also means that you interfere with nerve and muscle activity. So we know that cardiac muscle and nerves rely upon calcium in order for them to be able to contract and to transmit nerve impulses. So getting enough vitamin D synthesis is really important, getting exposure to ultraviolet radiation, particularly in Tasmania, where we know that there's not as much sun as in other areas of Australia. So it's important that you get vitamin D synthesis. And there's all research going on in the importance of vitamin D, particularly in things like multiple sclerosis and things like that. So if you're interested in that area, one of the areas of research that we do here in the School of Medicine or the Menzies Institute of Medical Research is vitamin D's role in multiple sclerosis. Okay, so that's it for this is the final part of this lecture on the integumentary system. So now you can proceed to your final checkpoint number 4 on Milo, and then you're done. And this is your last online lecture from me. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch and listen to these, and I hope you enjoyed them and my stupid voices for the online modules from before. All right, guys, good luck.